What is up, guys, and welcome to the first episode of Youthful Perspective. And today's topic, this week's topic, I suppose, will probably be well known to everyone who's watching this. Possibly, I hope so. And it's and it's the whole Brexit debate. Now, I'm not going to rant and rave about pros and cons of leaving. That's not the principle of this video, because the vote has happened, and apparently we are leaving the United Kingdom, the European Union. So this video is about providing information about what's happening now. Now we have left. Well, we haven't left, but you know what I mean. Now we have exited or voted to exit the European Union. So for the people who have, who are watching this from abroad, maybe, who haven't really particularly been following the story, what is Brexit? Well, to put it plainly, it's a cross between Britain and exit. Brexit. So, it's basically the term used for Britain leaving the European Union. Why is Britain leaving the European Union? Well, for many political reasons, money, gubbins, and stuff like that. But what actioned it was the referendum that was held on the 23rd of June in 2016, to which over 30 million people turned out to the referendum to vote. And of the whole population, that's England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, it came to a total of 52% for the Leave campaign, which meant that Leave won the referendum. So what happens? What happens from there? Well, Article 50, I think it is, or something like that. Don't quote me on it. That is meant to be initiated to allow us to leave the European Union, and since the referendum, that hasn't been sorted. Why? Well, David Cameron left office the day after the referendum was held, so the day that the decision was brought in that we wanted to leave. David Cameron left, and got a new Prime Minister, Theresa May. Now, the former Home Secretary took over from David Cameron, and she was pro EU, so she wanted to stay in the European Union. But she came in saying Brexit is Brexit, which basically means she wants to respect the people's opinion, and she wants to keep to that. But there's still a lot of debate about what it'll mean in actual practice, especially in the two key issues of how Britain does business with the European Union from there, and the right of free movement and everything like that. So those are the big things, really. Moving on from that, what about the economy? Well, the UK economy, like, the day we voted to leave the European Union, the value of the pound dropped significantly. The economy itself has withered with the initial shock of the Brexit vote. Although the value of the pound remains near a 30-year low, it still is worth more than the euro and the dollar. Only just. Some major firms such as EasyJet and John Lewis have pointed out that the slump in sterling has increased their costs, which means stuff like buying stuff from abroad, basically, and imports and everything like that. That's the stuff that's going to raise the prices. But it's not like the end of the world. The pound will level out. It's just still in shock that, we voted to leave the EU. Why is it in shock? Because of the unpredictability of what will happen to the economy when we actually do leave. Now, even when the article is like set in motion to leave the European Union, that's going to take about 2 years. So don't panic. It's not going to be activate then leave. It's going to be a slow 2 year into leaving, so we can sort out everything, and hopefully by that point the economy will have balanced out. We would have got everything in place. This is why it's taking so long for us to actually leave the EU at the moment, or actually put into place that article that allows us to leave, because the Prime Minister, she wants to make sure we're stable enough to leave. There's no point in just jumping and diving straight in the deep end, because if you do that, you're going to drown. So onwards from that, the Bank of England has cut their interest rates from 0.5% to 0.25%, which is a record low, and the first cut since 2009. After the vote, and there has not been the economy slump or recession that some had predicted. People had said prior to the vote that there was going to be a huge recession. We'd go back to what it was like in 2008. Where the price of Freddos go up and everything. Like, no, that's not happened, which is a plus, and fingers crossed that doesn't happen. But again, no one can see the future. You can only predict. Now, I'm going to cover it just because some people, I don't know why they wouldn't, but some people may not know what the European Union is. So the European Union, often known as the EU, is an economic and political partnership involving 28 countries. It began after World War II to foster economic cooperation, with the idea that countries which trade together are more likely to avoid going to war with each other, basically. So it's a bit like the League of Nations type thing, kind of like that. Which was the pre-World War I thing. It has since grown to become a single market, allowing goods and people to move around, basically as if the member states were one country. So it means you've got freedom of movement. You don't need visas to get into other... If you are part of the EU, you don't need a visa to get into other countries in the EU. It's got its own currency, the euro, which is used by only 19 of the member countries, its own parliament, and now sets its own rules in a wide range of areas, including environment, transport, consumer rights, and even things such as mobile phone chargers, which, if you've been abroad in the past, you know that mobile phone chargers can go excessively high. So there are some perks to being in the EU. So the big question everybody wants to know is, when will Britain actually leave the EU? So for the UK to leave the EU, it has to invoke the agreement called Article 50, which also known as the Lisbon Treaty, which gives the two sides 2 years to agree on terms of the split. So the dates have been moving and shifting constantly since the referendum, but Theresa May has said she hopes to start these negotiations in March this year, 2017, which will mean us potentially leaving the EU around the summer of 2019. But here's the big thing. Recently, last year, just before Christmas, there was a High Court judgment to which challenged Theresa May's right to trigger Article 50 without getting the backing of Parliament. It was successful in the High Court, which meant that she needed then to persuade Parliament to be able to do this, because let's be honest, it's a big decision. And a lot of people got frustrated about that. Now, to clear all that mumbo-jumbo, basically what the referendum is the public's view it's like advice with a decision like this. It's like, so what do we want to do? We but just want to leave the EU. That's advice. Like the referendum could go ahead, and basically nothing could be done about it. Like they could just leave it. Because it's advice. You know, at the end of the day, Parliament are there to run the country, not us. That's why we vote them in. So yeah, that happened, which like made things a bit topsy turvies. But it's expected that the MPs said they respected the decision of the referendum vote, which means they will still vote to leave, because otherwise that would create national uproar. Because at the end of the day, it means it would put across the impression that they don't value the public opinion. So the likelihood is they will vote to leave and activate or trigger the Article 50 process. Theresa May has set up a government department which takes responsibility for Brexit. And like basically it doesn't put too much pressure on anybody else, basically. This will play a central role in negotiations with the EU and seek out new international agreements with other countries in the EU and outside the EU. Because at the end of the day, when we leave the EU, we have to then renegotiate everything, because we're not part of that democracy anymore, that area. So that's another key thing. This is why it's taking so long to leave the EU. Speaking of that, like, how long will it take for Britain to leave the EU? Well, like I've said, like it will have to take 2 years to negotiate its withdrawal, but no one really knows how the Brexit process will work. Article 50 was only created in late 2009, and it's never been used, ever. So we are the first people to use it. So it could like the former Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond has said it could take up to 6 years for the United Kingdom to completely exit and complete those negotiations. The terms of Britain's exit will have to be agreed by 27 national parliaments, a process which could take years. So, you know, these are the things we've got to deal with. I mean, on the bright side, at least we can still go to Spain for so long without, you know, messing around with visas. So that's a positive, I suppose. Positive for us. Baby steps, baby steps, baby steps. So, yeah, like, other big questions is, what will happen to the European Union citizens living in the UK at the time of us exiting? Well, the government has declined to give a firm guarantee about the status of EU nationals currently living in the UK, saying it's not possible without a reciprocal pledge from the EU for other EU members about the millions of British nationals living on the continent. The EU nationals have the right to permanent residence, which is granted after they lived in the UK for 5 years. They'll be able to stay. The chief civil servant at the Home Office has said that the rights of other EU nationals would be subject to negotiations on the Brexit and the will of Parliament. So, what does that mean? Well, basically, if you're an EU national and you've lived in the UK for 5 years or more, you're safe. That's fine. The grey area comes if you haven't. That's the grey area, to which nobody really knows, because the other 27 countries within the European Union aren't playing ball. So, parallel to that, what happens to the UK citizens working in the EU or living in the EU? Well, a lot of that depends on the kind of deal the UK agrees with the EU. If it remains within the single market, it would almost certainly retain free movement rights, allowing UK citizens to work in the EU and vice versa. So, this is where it again gets a bit more complicated. The single market allows us to trade back and forth, back and forth. It's one deal, basically. It avoids having multiple deals with every other nation. But in order to be part of the single market, you have to pay money. Now, when the Brexit campaign would go cracking on about money and whatnot, and saying, we're losing money and stuff like that, and that we get all this money back, well, that's not true. Because in order for us to retain all these rights and trade deals and make it quite easy for us, really, in the exit negotiations, it would be logical to stay in the single market, because it stops all the fiddle faddle. But that means paying a hefty chunk, which is when we paid money into the EU, that's what we were paying for. Part of the thing we were paying for was the single market and to allow everyone freedom of right and freedom of trade within the European Union. So it all kind of fizzles down to that when it comes to, what happens to us. But what happens if we don't take single market? Well, if the government opted to impose work permit restrictions, then other countries would reciprocate, meaning Britons would have to apply for visas to work, basically, like you do to any other country outside the EU. What about nationals who want to work in the UK? Well, again, it depends on whether the UK government decides to introduce a permit system of kind that currently applies to non-EU citizens, limiting entry to skilled workers in professions where there are shortages. The rights haven't changed yet, and asking anyone to contact them if, the rights haven't changed yet, and the Citizens' Advice has reminded people to, just contact them for advice and things like that. So, yeah, at the minute, stuff like... because we're not very far into this whole Brexit thing, so everything's still grey and everything's still a bit mushy, which is the whole purpose of this video, is to try and make it a bit more clearer. Especially for people my age, that's the point of the channel, to help make things clear. I'm 19, so, and I know people my age and younger have a bit of unclarity. There's not much clarity around it for us and getting our heads around it. So, another big question is, will there be another referendum? Because it is quite logical, and it's quite plausible that there could be another referendum. But saying that, it's highly unlikely. Both the Conservative and Labour parties, which are the leading political parties in the United Kingdom, have ruled out another referendum, arguing that it would be undemocratic. It would be an undemocratic breach of trust with the British people, who clearly voted to leave. The Liberal Democrats, who have a handful of MPs in Parliament, have vowed to halt Brexit and keep Britain in the EU if they were to win the next general election, which is a complete disregard to the 52% of people who voted to leave the European Union. Some commentators, including the former House of Commons clerk Lord Lisavane, have argued that further referendum would be needed to ratify whatever deal the UK hammers out with the EU, but there are few signs political leaders view this as a viable option. Will MPs get a vote on the Brexit deal? Yes, is the basic answer to that. Theresa May has appeared keen to avoid a vote on her negotiating stance, to avoid having to give away her priorities. But Theresa May has said that there will be a Commons and Lords vote to approve whatever deal the UK and the rest of the EU agree at the end of the 2-year process. It is worth mentioning that any deal also has to be agreed by the European Parliament, with British MEPs getting a chance to vote in there as well. So, what does that mean? Well, basically, whatever we vote to do, the European Union also has to agree on it. It's not just a case of, right, we're leaving, we're off. There has to be agreement on both parties, otherwise I don't even want to know what happens if that happens. It would be chaos, absolutely chaos. Another big question that's constantly asked is, will we be able to use our passports? Yeah, it's a British document. There's no such thing as an EU passport, so your passport will stay the same. In theory, the government could, if they wanted to decide to change the colour, which is currently standardised for EU countries. But what would be the point? Seriously? So, as I mentioned earlier, with the single market, with us possibly staying in it, what is it? Well, the single market, like I said, is seen by its advocates as the EU's biggest achievement and one of the main reasons it was set up in the first place. Trading, freedom of movement. Britain was a member of the free trade area in Europe before it joined what was then known as the common market. In a free trade area, countries can trade with each other without paying tariffs, which is what other countries pay us. It's a bit like tax type thing, But it was not a single market because the member states don't have to merge with their economies together. The European Union single market, which was completed in 1992, allows the free movement of goods, services, money and people within the European Union as if it was a single country, as I mentioned earlier. It is possible to set up a business or take any job anywhere within it. The idea was to boost trade, create jobs and lower prices, but it requires common law making to ensure products are made to the same technical standards and imposes other rules to ensure a level playing field. So when it comes, for example, child's toys, all have to pass not just the UK standard thing, but the European Union safety standard, which means every country has to pass that. So that means, the likelihood is, if you were to buy something in Spain, it's going to be safe for your child. And it's the same over here. It should be built to the same quality, or there are those set rules to make it safe. That is one advantage of being in this single market, is the fact that it's easier to monitor and create a law that every country has to follow, which is one thing that ticked off the Brits, which is why we voted to leave, because we didn't like being told what to do. It's the basic thingy of it. We're a nation that one of the oldest nations in the world, and we don't like being told what to do. It's something that the whole world, it's like a stereotype of British people. We're stubborn. So is Britain the only state to leave the EU? Has any other state left? No. No state has ever left the EU before. But Greenland, one of Denmark's overseas territories, held a referendum in 1982 after gaining a greater degree of self-government and voted by 52% to 48% to leave, which it duly did after a period of negotiation. So, another thing that I keep hearing being thrown around is Scotland. Because Scotland had this referendum to leave the United Kingdom. They lost that, so they're still part of the United Kingdom. Now, what does that mean for Scotland? Because suddenly Nicola Sturgeon is suddenly up in arms because the United Kingdom, which they are now part of, voted to leave the EU. And she don't like that, apparently. So Scotland's First Minister, who is Nicola Sturgeon, said in the wake of the Leave result that it is democratically unacceptable that Scotland faces being taken out of the EU when it voted to remain. A second independence referendum for the country is now highly likely, She has said, although not in 2017, she has also said that she wants Scotland to stay in the single market, and has said Mrs May's decision to rule out the UK staying in the single market undoubtedly brings the referendum closer. Which basically means Scotland have, basically had a tantrum, had a bit of a hissy fit, you know. So that's basically what's happened with Scotland. I'm English. That's my view on it. I'm really sorry, Scotland. That was a bit biased of me. I really am sorry. But that's what she's doing. She's throwing a hissy fit. Northern Ireland. What does it mean for Northern Ireland? I haven't heard much about Northern Ireland itself. So, apparently before resigning, Deputy First Minister Martin McGuinness said that the impact in Northern Ireland would be very profound, and that the whole island of Ireland should now be able to vote on reunification, which means that Northern Ireland could potentially become part of Ireland and leave the United Kingdom. But speaking while she was still Northern Ireland Secretary, Theresa Villiers ruled out the call from Sinn Féin for a border poll, saying the circumstances in which one would be called did not exist. The land border is likely to be a key part of the Brexit talks. Theresa May said a priority of hers would be negotiating a deal with the EU which allowed a common travel area between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. Which means there won't be an issue, hopefully, between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland crossing each other. So enough about the other countries. Let's go as one. How will it affect the pensions of the United Kingdom citizens? Well, during the referendum campaign, David Cameron said the so-called triple lock for state pensions would be threatened by a UK exit. So this is an agreement which pensions increase by at least the level of earnings. The inflation of 2.5% a year, whichever is the highest. But his successor, Theresa May, said that she will keep it in place, at least for the current Parliament, which is due to last until 2020. So, the principle in which you put in money to your pension and your employer matches it, that stays the same, at least till 2020. So that's safe. Your pension should be good on that in that debacle. Will cars need new number plates? Probably not, because there's no EU-wide law on vehicle registration or car number plates, and the EU flag symbol is a voluntary identifier, not a compulsory one. So the DVLA says that there has been no discussion about what would happen to plates with the flag if the UK voted to leave. So that's good. That cuts down a cost, I suppose. Nothing like that to worry about. So your cars are safe. And I suppose, like, the last 2 points I want to cover is, the first one is who wanting to leave the EU. Well, the UK Independence Party, which received nearly 4 million votes, which is 30% of those cast in May's general election, has campaigned for years that Britain's exit from the EU. They were joined in their call during the referendum campaign by about half the Conservative Party's MPs, including Boris Johnson and 5 members of the cabinet. A handful of Labour Party MPs and the Northern Ireland Party, the DUP, were also in favour of leaving. So they're the guys who wanted to leave. And why? Well, they said Britain was being held back by the EU, which they said imposed too many rules on the business and charged billions of pounds a year in membership fees for little in return. They also cited that sovereignty and democracy, and they wanted Britain to take back full controls of its borders and reduce the number of people coming in to live or work. Okay. Well, that kind of covers what I've already said. Now, the last point I want to cover, which is rather important, is will the UK be able to join the EU in the future? Well, the UK would have to start from scratch, basically, with no rebate, and enter, accession talks with the EU. Every member state would have to agree on the UK rejoining. And because of the attitude we are, like parties like the Independence Party and things like that have shown towards the EU, they might not be so keen on it. The election, with the elections looming elsewhere in Europe, other leaders might not be so generous towards the UK. New members are required to adopt the euro as their currency once they meet the relevant criteria. Although Britain/the UK could try to negotiate an opt-out. So basically on that, it'd be extremely tough for us to rejoin the European Union, because when we joined, it was a lot easier and simpler. So yeah, what are your thoughts on Brexit? And, do you think we should continue, or do you think we should have another referendum? Any thoughts? Leave a comment in the section below. If you've liked the video, please hit that like button. That would be awesome of you guys. And if you're not already, subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with myself, Jack, and the channel itself. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of January, which is about like 4 days. And yeah, I will speak to you all next week on a topic I don't know yet. Thank you guys for watching, and I will speak to you all in the next episode. Bye.